Welcome to Talking Heads, a project of the Africa Centre based in Cape Town. Each week we bring you the experts, mavericks and the thought leaders who are demanding we think differently about who and what it means to be African.
The themes of migration and dispersal are not unfamiliar to much of Africa's population, whether for the most macabre of reasons, the transatlantic slave trade, civil wars, genocides and ethnic cleansing, or in more modern times, the movement of people across the continent and across the seas for love, money, education, and the possibility of better, Africans are spread the world over. Depending on where you look, the number fluctuates, but there's an estimated 160 million Africans in the diaspora, the largest group being in Latin America. Specifically in relation to modern-day voluntary migration of Africans to other continents, according to a 2000 UNESCO report, there were over 300,000 highly qualified Africans scattered all over the world, 30,000 of whom had PhDs. What does it mean, though? What's the impact of over 10% of Africa's population living outside the continent? Is it the brain drain so many speak of? Is it just what has become normal? Not at all a reason for gloom, but rather another aspect of life to wonder about, pay attention to, and discuss. Jocelyne Muhutu Remy is a media exec and former television producer. Born and raised in Addis Ababa to a Rwandan mother and a Burundian father, Jocelyne has lived in Paris, Nairobi, and now South Africa. Perhaps it is this kind of rootlessness that has made the themes of exile, migration, and identities lost and found so defining in Jocelyne's life. In the past 15 years, while working as a journalist in Paris and Kenya, she put tremendous energy into researching and writing about the African diaspora. Whether producing mini-documentaries on Ethiopian Jews in Israel, or writing about the descendants of African slaves in Eastern Europe, African footballers in Turkey, or Lebanese immigrants in West Africa, she's interested in exploring and documenting these transient lives. Most recently, Jocelyne has been working at gathering fascinating tales of incredible Africans and African communities in remote parts of the world. The aim is to illustrate the global nature of the African experience and the profound impact of diasporas across the world. Her project is called Next Culture Lab. I am Yewande Omotoso, and today I'm talking with Jocelyne Muhutu Remy about her project and book on Africans in the diaspora. Jocelyne, thank you for being with us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Yewande.
The idea for Next Culture Lab, it's really an incredible one because, for me anyway, it speaks both to histories that forcibly moved Africans across the seas, as well as to the really nostalgic, emotive and practical circumstance of making home away from home. How did you get the idea and what is your vision for it?
Well, Yewande, my personal history is really one of rootlessness and political upheaval in the Great Lakes region. And it's also a story of Pan-Africanism in the sense that, as you've said in the intro, I'm from Rwanda and Burundi, but I grew up in another East African country in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, surrounded by all sorts of Africans because I lived just opposite the African Union where my mom worked. And I've seen really a lot of examples of people like me who were also being uprooted and were now living in Ethiopia and the consequences of that on the youth around me. Essentially, this business of leaving, of being separated from your loved ones and from your home country is really the story of my life. And I've been thinking about it often throughout my childhood as a teenager. And later, when I started working as a journalist, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that the first story that I did was about this, about Africans in Eastern Europe I'm not just interested in African diaspora, meaning the Africans going elsewhere. I'm also interested in other people coming to Africa and what that means for them. The reason why I'm also interested in that is because I also grew up with people from Armenia in Ethiopia. I saw Greek communities in Eastern Congo, in Burundi, obviously Indians in East Africa, Lebanese people in their hundreds of thousands in West Africa. And that is also really fascinating. How do you leave your native Beirut and find yourself in Senegal and integrate and make a life for yourself and your descendants there? I find this really amazing.
You've started research on the project and it's ongoing. Could you talk a bit about your work on it thus far, what you've come across?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So essentially, the words Next Culture Lab it's an all-encompassing project that includes a coffee table book, because I think illustrating this with pictures would be really awesome, is really awesome. A blog that I'm developing into a news site. I'll tell you a little more about that. And I used to be a TV producer, so I'm really very familiar with the work of documentaries, mainly mini documentaries of about 10 minutes. So I'm developing a TV show project around, diasporas. And indeed, I've found some really fascinating stories. The one that really comes to mind immediately now is African soldiers in the Nazi army, soldiers, black people who fought with the Nazis against the Allies and completely participated in the Wehrmacht and the idea behind Hitler's final solution. And this is something that is really not well known. We do know about black people who perished in the concentration camps, but we really don't know much about black people on the other side. And that is really fascinating. And I found several examples, including photos, amazing photos of such black soldiers. So that's one thing I can think of. And then you have people of African descent in really unexpected places. I'm thinking of Iran, for example, where you have a community called Bandaris. These are black people, as black as you and me, who speak Farsi and are completely integrated into the Iranian society. They are descendants of slaves from the 18th and 19th century. And you have many such communities in other places in that region. In Turkey, for example, of course, if you travel in the Middle East, you will see black people. So that is a little less unexpected. But really, did you know that there is such a black community in a place like Abkhazia, which is a region of Georgia? And really, how did they get there? What's their story? It's really amazingly fascinating.
Your project made me think of something called third culture kids. One parent from one place, other parent from another, child raised in yet another place, or other series of places. You're a third culture child by that definition. I am one, your children are. And more, this is a reality for people and families. Bearing in mind issues of identity, integration, what do you think all this means? Why is a project like yours so important?
Yes, indeed. The second and third generations are going to be a big focus of my work, how they adapt, the resilient nature of immigrants, and also the identity crises that this uprooting creates. There's one example that comes to mind. It's Ethiopian Jews in Israel. They arrived there in the most amazing circumstances, where Israel, as part of the broad project of bringing every Jew back to Israel called Aliyah, went to Ethiopia and brought back hundreds of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. So this was 30 and 20 years ago. Now, these people have children and grandchildren who were born and raised in Israel, and these kids have to battle. I've seen them. I went to Israel actually and did a TV story on this. They have to put together their blackness, their Ethiopianness, their Judaism, and the fact that they're citizens of Israel. They need to find role models. They're not sure where to find them. Some of them choose African Americans as their model, but it doesn't always work because they are not African Americans. Some try to relate back to their native Ethiopia, but that doesn't work either because Ethiopia has moved a completely different direction, and they cannot relate to modern, contemporary Addis Ababa, modern Ethiopia. So really, these kids are fascinating to study, and how they're perceived, etc.
It seems banal to reduce this whole phenomenon of diaspora to words like good or bad, but there are adverse effects of this migratory trend. Many African nations bemoan a brain drain, for instance. Of course, among several other reasons, those leaving are searching for opportunities not available at home. There's a blog I came across called Homecoming Revolution, with the byline, Africa deserves her skills back. There's this whole sense of we're losing something and we need to recover it. What do you make of that aspect?
One thing that has bothered me a lot in the past few years is the question of, what are you saying? Why are you doing this? Are you just compiling stories? What is the point? And that bothered me for a long time, because I wanted to be an advocate of something, or like an activist. And people who speak about brain drain, for example, raise a very important issue. And often they are militant, trying to reduce brain drain or reverse it. I realized that actually I don't need to be an advocate of anything. Just telling the stories, enlightening people, making them discover all of this, explaining, is a noble enough idea. So it's a good thing that some people try to fight brain drain. I'd rather describe it via, stories of specific people. So yes, brain drain is going to be a topic of in the blog, but not necessarily to fight against it or denounce it or etc. Just telling people about it as a phenomenon.
When can we expect to hold the book, see the documentaries, watch the shows, visit the blog? Can you tell us a bit about this coming to fruition?
Hoping to launch the blog/news site in about 3 months. The coffee table book I'm very, very keen on, because I can see how beautifully illustrated it can be. There are some rare pictures out there of the Nazi soldiers I was talking about. So I'd like these to be all compiled in one book, and that is much more of a long-term project. The costs are huge. So essentially in the next year is when I want these two projects to come to fruition, and my proposal for a TV show around diasporas, meaning a half-hour show with stories of specific communities, of specific people. Let me give you just one example. There is this amazing guy from Gabon who is a Shaolin master in China. He went there to visit his uncle, who was ambassador of Gabon in China. He went there for 2 weeks and never left the place, and continued working on his passion of martial arts. And he's now a celebrity in China. He's an actor. He speaks perfect Mandarin, and a profile of this guy would be really interesting for this TV show. So essentially, to answer your question, Next Culture Lab in its various manifestations will become a reality between now and the middle of next year.
I can't wait to see, read, learn, consume, and really find out about these stories that you're shining a light on. Thank you very much for speaking to us about it, and I wish you all the best with the project.
Thank you, Yewande.
To find out more about Jocelyne Muhutu Remy and to listen to other podcasts, visit www.talkingheads.org.za.